Thank you everyone for joining us. As I mentioned, we have a lot of folks signed up for today. I know that AFPs are a really hot topic for folks. But before we get started there, I would like to feature, as you all know, this is a standard feature of the Coffee Chat, the brainstorm of colleagues here at Bio and beyond, where we introduce incoming or new CEOs to for patient advocacy groups, and really give them a chance to say hi to the patient community, introduce themselves, share just a little bit about themselves, and then really for us to welcome them into the community overall. And today I am honored on World Hemophilia Day to introduce you all to Phil Gattone, the incoming CEO, the new CEO at National Bleeding Disorders Foundation, who has many of us know in the patient advocacy community. So we'll hear a couple of minutes from you and share your vision, and we'll offer you a great big welcome. So, Phil.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, all. Hope everybody's having a good start to their day. I'm Phil Gattone. I'm CEO of National Bleeding Disorders Foundation. We used to be called the National Hemophilia Foundation, but we broadened our reach into other inheritable blood and bleeding disorders, and so we changed our name and our brand a bit to reflect that new outreach. And at NBDF, we are dedicated to finding cures for inheritable disorders and to addressing the complications that come with those disorders through education and advocacy research, so more families can thrive. And I just really appreciate the chance to speak with you all today just for a little bit. Like many of you, I've served for most of my professional career in patient advocacy, serving families either through the biotech and industry side or through patient advocacy leadership. And so I'm especially grateful to speak with you all today. And my wife, Jill, and I, we have 4 children. Our oldest son, Philip, has epilepsy, and that's how we kind of became involved. We actually found him in his bedroom at 4 in the morning, way back before iPhones existed and before the internet was really what it is today. Way back in April of 1991, we found our son having a seizure in his bedroom at 4 in the morning, and it took many hours and days to get him through that experience. The seizure lasted over an hour, and he coded, and they went through all sorts of procedures at the hospital, and he was intubated, but we came through that, and he began his journey being very brave, as millions of families do across the country with different diseases and disorders. And we began our journey as his parents, trying to figure out and navigate through all of the gauntlet, really, of patient access. And it was through that we began our journey into volunteering, getting involved in the advocacy world. So I've seen a lot of change over the past 30 years. I served for 8 years as CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation after serving 20 years in the company. And then now I get to serve with my colleagues at NBDF. And through it all, I can say that, patients do feel that pressure. I felt that pressure as a father, trying to figure out how to get access to the therapies that our son desperately needed. And in our advocacy roles, whether we're serving as a representative of a diagnostic or a therapeutic device, any area we serve in, or if we're in the patient advocacy space, we also feel that pressure, and we have that compassion for others. So for me, I have a lot of hope, and the hope I feel for people living with inheritable blood and bleeding disorders, and beyond that, to include anyone living with a debilitating health condition, is actually strengthened because of the work you all are doing and the leadership that Bio is showing each and every day. And I just wish you all were around in the early 90s to help, but I will say that I am thankful for those who were around at that time, paving the way for families to have access that they now enjoy today. So want to encourage you to continue the fight, and I look forward to learning with you and serving with you, and also learning more today from our distinguished panelists. So I'll just say thank you for your leadership and your partnership. And Michelle, I'll come back to you. Thank you so much.
Of course, welcome. Well, we are really happy that you are here. So why don't we get started? And I saw Laura came up on camera, so I'm sure she says hi. So excellent. All right. Well, why don't we get started? I anticipate more folks will join us as they get coffee into them. But today we are talking about alternative funding programs. As you all know, we had a coffee chat on this topic actually a year ago. So back in April, we heard from leading advocates who are really leading the charge in understanding what AFPs are, the impact that they were having, and also thinking about sort of the privacy issues, all kinds of issues around AFPs. Fast forward a year, and our panelists, among many of you who are also here with us today, have really done a lot of legwork. Will update us on that, share kind of what the current state is, but also I'd love to open that up to all of you for questions as we go through this. So don't be shy about just either raise your hand or pop a question in the chat as you see fit, and then we'll open it broadly for Q&A toward the end. But again, if you have pertinent questions as we go through, please feel free. We'll put up the biographical sketches of our speakers so I don't spend tons and tons of time on it. But everybody, I think, appreciates the leadership from the patient community and Kim Zubarak's lead as with the task force related to AFPs. So we're excited to hear from her today. Kathy Peters with ACS CAN, who will talk about efforts in the states. Charlotte Buswald, who comes to us from Exelexis and leads the patient access program, built the patient assistance program, for Exelexis, will talk to us about what they're seeing. And Ashura Vantries from AIMD Alliance, and she'll talk about a white paper that the organization put out a couple months ago, all about AFPs. So with that, last year when we had this session, we started off with a little video that was kind of a distressing and yet informative video. I think many of you have seen it by now, so we may tee that up a little bit later on, but it's essentially a recruitment video to employers suggesting that they sign up for an AFP. But why don't I turn things over to you, Kim, first, let you talk a little bit, and then we will show the video after you are done talking, and then we'll move on to our next speaker.
Sure. Thank you. And I cannot believe it has been a year. When you said that, I was like, oh my God, wow. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kim Zubarak, Associate Vice President of Policy with Cancer Care. And I'd like to thank Michelle and her team at BIO for hosting this coffee chat on alternative funding programs. For those of you not familiar with Cancer Care, we're the leading national organization providing free support services and information to help people manage the emotional, practical, and financial challenges of cancer. And in 2023, Cancer Care provided $81 million in financial and copay assistance to patients for both practical needs such as transportation, as well as to get their cancer medications. And we're thrilled that this year is Cancer Care's 80th birthday as an organization. So, we've been around a long time, and we plan on being here for 80 more years and plus. So before I begin today, I'd like to read a brief disclaimer that my discussion today is for general education purposes only. Neither me nor Cancer Care is opining on the legality or appropriateness of any alternative funding program. So since there is probably a wide variation in knowledge base with alternative funding, for those on the call today, I wanted to just read a very, very basic definition just to set the stage. So alternative funding programs are methods designed by third-party for-profit vendors, and they're targeted to self-funded employers claiming to reduce the employer's spend on drug spending. And they do this either by carving out, meaning excluding, or by denying prior authorization to some or all specialty medications, and then requiring patients to enroll or apply for a patient assistance program in order to try to obtain or source that medication from the patient assistance program instead of the plan covering that drug. So that's very fundamental, but it sets a stage, and we'll dive a little bit deeper, as will all the speakers today. So it is important to note that sourcing the medication from the PAP is the end goal of these alternative funding programs. And some AFPs may source drugs from abroad. And some AFPs may occasionally, as a person awaits their PAP determination, may try to seek other patient assistance in the interim. But let's be clear on what their ultimate goal is, and that is to get the drug from the patient assistance program so the plan does not have to cover that drug. And not surprisingly, AFP vendors do not do this out of the goodness of their heart. They do charge a fee to employers for their services. Contracts vary on how they're set up and what they get paid. Some vendors may take a percentage of the cost savings. Other vendors may charge a flat fee or a monthly fee. Still others may do a combination, and yet there could be a totally different payment arrangement. But what's important to know is that employers do pay alternative funding program vendors for their services. So a patient who complies with an AFP and does submit, and I'll use the word AFP. I'm hoping everybody's okay with that. AFP being alternative funding program and PAP being a patient assistance program. I'll try to say them out sometimes just so people don't get confused. But so a patient that does comply with an alternative funding program and employer's requirement to submit an application for a patient assistance program may not qualify for that program. Usually this is if they do not meet income eligibility requirements. So some employers have arrangements that if that happens and a patient does not qualify, that they may override the exclusion as a medical necessity, or if they went the prior auth denial path, they may say, never mind, we will accept that as a prior auth. We will approve that prior authorization, and they will cover that patient's drug. However, this is not a guarantee, and each plan and the terms of each plan is different. So you may have instances where a patient does not, they're required to apply for a patient assistance program. They are not eligible, and yet the employer is not obligated by any means to either override as a medical necessity or to go back and improve that prior auth that was previously denied. So what are the harms posed to patients from AFPs, right? We know these vendors sell it saying, it's a win-win for everybody. Everybody gets their drugs, the employers save money, all is good. However, we know that is not true from working with our patients across the disease states that really depend on specialty medications to treat serious conditions. So I'll touch on 6 ways that AFPs harm patients. First and foremost, patient assistance programs are specifically designed to help patients who are truly uninsured or underinsured. And by alternative funding vendors working with plans, going and carving out or denying prior authorization for specialty medications that may well have otherwise been covered under the plan, drains those patient assistance programs and leaves not sufficient availability for patients who are truly in need. So that cuts across all issues with AFPs. Also, requiring patients to apply for a patient assistance program causes delays. It causes delays whether that person ultimately qualifies for the patient assistance program or does not qualify for the patient assistance program. Everybody suffers delays, and the patient populations that we're speaking about, time is of the essence. There is 1 month, 2 months, 5 months. Any delay is unacceptable and can really have negative outcomes for their health. Third, a full course of treatment may not be available from a patient assistance program. Perhaps if somebody does qualify, but there's only partial course of treatment, which leaves the patient in a precarious situation mid-treatment. And then clinicians are often required to get involved in the AFP application process for the PAP. They will be required to submit different information on the patient's medical condition, etc. This really takes away that clinician's focus, which should be solely on caring for the patient and providing care for that patient, making sure that they get the most appropriate treatment and in the timeliest manner. And typically, if a patient does not agree to work with the alternative funding program and says, I don't want to apply for that patient assistance program, often to let people know a power of attorney and other very personal information may be required. So somebody may not feel comfortable working with these alternative funding vendors. And if that is the case, in most instances, the patient is then on their own to pay for their medication, and to add insult to injury, anything they do spend would not be counted towards their deductible or out-of-pocket maximums. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, some AFPs do source drugs from abroad, which could expose patients to potentially unsafe drugs. So recognizing, the significant harms that AFPs cause to patients, in the fall of 2022, Colette Koulianos, a colleague in the hemophilia space, and I started a task force to educate, raise awareness, and stop these barriers to access that AFPs present to patients. So we engage all stakeholders, including patient groups, clinicians, employers, policymakers, and others, with the goal to explain what AFPs are, how they work, how to identify them, and then how to stop the harm that they cause to patients. The task force currently has 25 member organizations from across a broad sector of diseases, all of which require specialty medications. This includes cancer, hemophilia, kidney disease, arthritis, rare diseases, HIV, hepatitis C, psoriasis, cardiovascular disease, and sickle cell. I read that because I didn't want to leave others out. Obviously, this is not an exclusive. More conditions certainly may fall within this. And if anybody is interested in learning or joining the task force, please reach out to me, and my information is available through Michelle. So as part of the task force's mission to educate and raise awareness, we've had meetings with the Department of Labor, the Federal Trade Commission, and other policy entities, including the White House Domestic Policy Council. We've explained how AFPs can harm patients, and we've asked about concerns that we have with these practices. And I'm just going to list some of these concerns that we have shared. One, do AFPs discriminate based on a health factor? Two, do AFPs breach an employer's fiduciary duty to its employees under the Consolidated Appropriations Act? Three, are AFPs deceptive or unfair business practices? Four, do AFP drug importations contradict provisions of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act? Do AFPs discriminate based on income? And do AFPs improperly use planned funds with regard to the medical loss ratio? Do AFPs interfere with a patient's right to appeal an adverse claims decision? And do AFPs use claims procedures considered unreasonable under ERISA? So in addition, the task force has submitted comments in response to the proposed 2025 MBPP and to the Committee on Education and the Workforce on a request for information they issued on ERISA. So just a quick note in concluding, with regard to the 2025 MBPP, there's some great news in that, and we're very excited about two aspects of it. One, that the final NBPP did in fact codify what they said was already in place, although a lot of groups have spent years trying to work through that quagmire, but apparently it's been in place all along, that drugs that are covered on a plan in excess of the state's benchmark are EHBs, and that all cost sharing requirements, limitations, annual, all of that applies to those drugs. So that's wonderful news that that was codified and confirmed. We're also thrilled that an FAQ was issued saying that while currently the NBPP right now as finalized does not apply to self-funded or large group plans, that the agencies, Department of Labor, HHS, and Treasury does plan to issue guidance on that to align, in fact, and state that all drugs covered on a plan in excess of the state's benchmark are essential health benefits with all the limitations on cost sharing that go with that. And that will apply also to self-funded and large group plans, which is a huge win, and we're very excited. In fact, that does address the issue of copay maximizers really head on, and everybody is very grateful for that. I do want to point out, though, unfortunately, I don't want to end on a kind of a down term, but it does not, the MBPP itself does not correct or assist us with the AFP situation where drugs have been carved out. And the reason for that is that MBPP states very clearly that it is for drugs that are covered in excess of the state's benchmark. And when an alternative funding vendor excludes or carves out drugs, those drugs are not covered. Is there potentially applicability in different ways for when the prior auth denial path is selected instead of carving out? We think there may be, and we're still taking that under advisement and trying to figure out the factors that may influence when, if, or how that MBPP could assist patients on that front. So thank you and appreciate everybody.
Thanks so much. That's so informative. We'll go ahead and quickly show a video that is a little bit of the flip side, but this is how AFPs are marketed to those self-funded plans, just to give you a sense of kind of what the I guess the one-sided aspect of it is really from their marketing perspective. So go ahead. I'm not hearing audio though. Did you share the audio? Sorry about that. We'll get it teed up. So why don't we'll just quickly move on to our next speaker, and then we'll show it momentarily. So Charlotte Buswald from Exelixis. As I mentioned earlier, you created and launched the patient assistance program at Exelixis. I'm really happy to have you here today. Would love to hear from you, kind of your perspective. What is the patient experience going through and applying for patient assistance, and how has that evolved or changed since these AFPs came into being?
Well, thank you for including me, excuse me, this morning to talk about this, because this really is a subject that's having real impact on patients. And when we first started trying to get our arms around this, it was about 1.5 years ago. We were just coming off of accumulators and maximizers, and we started hearing about these AFP programs and really started to think about the implications that that type of a program could have on our oncology population. And we really came up with 3 key things: that there was going to be increased red tape for both patients and the healthcare providers, especially healthcare providers that are already overtaxed with this type of work. It was just going to be adding another layer. And in the oncology world, we are always focused on trying to get the patient started on therapy as quickly as possible. We have a free trial program, and the main gist of that program is for patients to be able to get on drug within 24 hours. So we are, very concerned about the red tape, and then that would lead to treatment delays. And then ultimately, with a treatment delay, that's always in oncology, can ultimately lead to reduced quality of care. And really what we learned is these programs, they're targeted to help employers save costs, but it comes at an extremely high cost by harming the patients. And we have seen all of this. And it is absolutely one of the most egregious things that I've seen since I've been in this industry for close to 40 years. We find that these programs are targeting, the AFP plans are targeting wage earning employees. We've seen patients that are employed in supermarkets, trucking companies, a lot of union patients. They are definitely targeting those employers that would have what I would call wage earning employees. And so it's really distressing. And I want to share with you just some of the cases that we've seen so that maybe you can relate to and appreciate what it might be like. So imagine if you are you're an employee, you're paying your healthcare premiums, you've been diagnosed with cancer, maybe your family member has been diagnosed with cancer, you possibly work in a supermarket somewhere far away from the home office of the supermarket, so you're there, and you receive a letter that says, please be aware that the plan has elected to exclude Cabometyx due to the exclusion by the plan. The member is responsible for the cost of Cabometyx in its entirety. No portion of the cost is covered by the plan. So you receive a letter like that. You don't know where to go, who to talk to about it. Your HR department is in some other part of the country. You're just thankful to have a job. And the last thing you're going to do is make a stink with HR and risk your wages or your employment. I've got 2 more excerpts that I'll read. Please be advised, denials or appeals for coverage will not be provided or initiated. Once again, think about, you've been diagnosed with cancer and you're receiving a letter like this from what you consider to be your health plan. And then the whole concept of pointing these patients to patient assistance programs is really real. So from another letter I pulled, please contact EASE, Exelixis Access Services, for possible coverage through their patient assistance. So you send this patient off on a wild goose hunt to find free drug. So anyways, those are just some real examples of letters that we've received. I want to share with you just some stories or some examples of patients, real patients that have been impacted and what these patients go through. So we have a 51-year-old male with metastatic kidney cancer. He works for a lumber company in Texas, working 8 to 10-hour shifts. He was new to therapy, so he was eligible for our free trial program, as any patient would be that's new to therapy and on label. And in this case, luckily, the healthcare provider was familiar with AFPs. They had dealt with them with another patient. I would say it's about 50-50 when it comes to HCPs understanding what an AFP is, and not ever even heard it, have not even heard of it. So there's real disparity there. But in this case, luckily, the HCP was aware. Both the HCP and the patient called the AFP to advocate for coverage on numerous occasions. And the process took several weeks. The patient was down to his last 2 tablets of the free trial before the AFP approved the patient for therapy. So took this patient, newly starting on oncology product, down to his last 2 tablets before they would approve it. So really putting a lot of unnecessary stress and burden on the patient. Also, like premier institutions, we've had a patient at MD Anderson that was subject to an AFP. They were unfamiliar with the process, and it was a lot of stress on the nurse and the patient part. And it took several weeks before the AFP actually covered the patient. We've had, Kim had mentioned about the income inequities. We definitely have seen that. We recently had a patient who was part of a healthcare system in the Midwest, working for a hospital, who had reached out, was part of an AFP, but I don't believe he really realized he was. He was actually a physician in the system and was applying for our free drug program kind of independently. When we started to reach out to the patient's prescriber and got connected with the internal organization, all of a sudden the physician quickly had coverage and the whole thing went away. And it's interesting, I wondered and I speculated, I thought if this had been an employee of the hospital system that was possibly in the food service department, would that have been the case? So I definitely feel like there is income profiling going on. I've been monitoring these patients for over a year now, and that was the closest we came to having a patient actually apply that would have been clearly over the income guidelines. So I do feel like the AFPs are directing some employees over to be serviced while others are put on this kind of track to apply for free drug. We also had a patient recently who passed while waiting to navigate through the AFP. Had started on a sample and unfortunately did not survive. And I thought, you know, I can't imagine that what that felt like for that family, that the last days of that patient were spent worrying about trying to figure out how they were going to get their drug. And it's really the employer's fiduciary responsibility to support these patients who pay premiums. It just seems egregious to me that this could actually go on. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of healthcare providers that understand the process, a lot that don't. We spend a great deal of time educating people on what these are. You know, and it's time consuming for us, it's time consuming for the HCPs, and it's very stressful on the patients. It's stressful on my team. They're always so worried about these patients because they're hearing their stories. They're, you know, the offices are relaying what the spouses are saying and how stressed they are. And it's just completely unacceptable. And every once in a while, I see a really well-written letter from an HCP, and I just wanted to close with this because I thought this was just so well done. It's, as a provider, I am extremely frustrated on my patient's behalf. This is the second year your company has denied approval for this drug for his stage 4 renal cell carcinoma. I appreciate your reconsideration, and I'm asking you to review your company's policies on this situation. I appreciate your reconsideration on behalf of my patient and look forward to a quick response on this so I may continue caring for my patient. So anyways, those are just a few of the things that we've seen. This is real. Everything that Kim outlined is happening and it's impacting patients. And I'm just so happy to see that there are so many of us gathered here to discuss the issue and create awareness because it's something that needs to be stopped.
Thank you so much. What kind of, have you seen an increase in a patient, you know, PAP program applications? Like what percentage increase have you seen since the pre-AFP era and the post-AFP era, or is it a little too soon to kind of assess that data?
So what's interesting is when we started looking, when I first heard about it, I thought, I don't think we've really seen any AFPs. But we started digging into cases, and sure enough, we had been putting patients, they show up as rendered uninsured, which we commonly see with patients who are off label. So patients who are down to their last options and are trying, you know, the prescriber may try other therapies. So it's not an uncommon thing for us to see because we do allow those patients into our PAP program. But so then I started peeling in and looking, okay, let's look for on-label patients who are in our PAP program with commercial insurance. And we found quite a few of them. So there were definitely under the radar, but it's been increasing. I would say we have a handful every month that come through. And it's just creating more, you know, awareness with the HCPs. They're often so shocked to learn that the practice even exists. And they're nervous, and it's like they have you know, going up against a payer, and these, I call them the middleman for the middleman, you know, so it just puts that extra layer, but yes, they definitely are increasing.
Thank you. I want to put up a slide quickly because one of the things that we're seeing now is the sort of AFP disclaimer language in many areas, including when it comes to copay coupons. So share that quickly, and you can put it in slide view. I won't name the organization this came from. But this is, a patient goes to get a coupon to assist with the medicine, and the manufacturer has, out of necessity, created this disclaimer. If you have an insurance plan that is participating in an alternate funding program, AFP, examples include but are not limited to ImpactsRx, Payer Matrix, Sharks, Script Sourcing, and Paid Health, that requires you to apply to this company's savings card program, or otherwise pursue specialty drug prescription coverage through an alternate funding vendor, as a condition of requirement for or prerequisite to coverage of this medicine, you're not eligible for and are prohibited from using our savings card program. So it is not just limited to the what we may consider sort of the charitable support, but in fact also to the copay assistance support. You can pull the slide down, and we can certainly share that language with you for those who are interested. But again, that the level of sophistication that the AFPs are developing is requiring more, more intervention from the manufacturers, who again, like Exelixis, are really looking to provide that care for people who truly have no coverage or very low coverage. So, and I wasn't sure if you all, if others have seen that same trend, but.
So yeah, I have seen that. We currently still, we do not have restrictions. If you're a commercial patient and have coverage, you can use our copay program, but it's increasingly become difficult to provide assistance to patients because they continue to exploit the program. And, if you think about, I have seen where some manufacturers have just cut off all commercial patients altogether. And we haven't done that because we're sensitive to those patients with other tumor types that have exhausted the options within their disease and are looking for kind of what I call the Hail Mary, their last chance. And so we want to provide drug to those patients. So we have not gone that far, but some manufacturers have.
Yeah, out of necessity. So
we're small, and so we're able to kind of follow these patients, one at a time. We're larger manufacturers. It's just not possible for them to, so everybody kind of gets applied, to a set of rules. So it really is challenging.
Thanks so much for all of those insights. We'll move over to Kathy Peters, who's going to talk to us about some efforts in the States. And Kathy is with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network and referred to us by Pam Traxel, who I think everybody knows and recognizes as a thought leader among us. So could everybody kindly mute if you are not muted? Okay, go ahead, Kathy.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. Everyone knows Pam for sure. I am part of our state and local campaigns team at ACSCAN, focusing on access to care issues. So my portfolio includes a whole bunch of prescription drug access issues. In terms of the state legislative landscape on AFPs, I like to talk about this in a two-bucket way. So we have sort of our set of bills that are attempting to get at copay accumulators as well as AFP. So I consider this kind of like a comprehensive approach. Maryland is the one state that was attempting to do this. I think that bill touched on a whole bunch of different schemes, including the AFP language, as well as copay accumulator. Unfortunately, I think that bill's probably not going to advance anymore this session. But we'll be back kind of at it next year. And then the other bucket is adding AFP language to existing state statutes around copay accumulators. So we're working closely with CSRO they're kind of leading the charge on a couple of bills in Louisiana and North Carolina to, like I said, add some AFP language to existing state statute around copay accumulator. I think, we sort of are looking at this year as a learning year on this issue. I think we're trying to see kind of what test balloons work, what messages work, who comes out of the woodwork to talk to lawmakers on the other side of this. So I think, you'll see us kind of figuring out this issue and how to approach it on the state level in order to do more effective work next session in 2025. Sort of to that end, I think we're always looking at developing materials that come at issues from the cancer lens. We did work with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society on a co-branded one-pager infographic-y type document that kind of lays out what a cancer patient would experience in an AFP. And that we're hoping that that document is helpful to just, begin the conversation with state lawmakers about what these programs are and how they impact patients. And then, we're always looking for stories. We're always trying to, talk about policy issues through the lens of the patient experience. And with this, I think we're really trying to get at the landscape of the problem. What are people experiencing? Which plans are they in? What, because I think there's some question about state employee plans starting to use AFPs or municipal governments. We've seen a little bit of evidence of that. So I think, those are products that states can regulate. So we're always looking for kind of the patient story in order to talk a little bit more effectively about the landscape of a problem. So I think that's kind of the gist of it. Like I said, we're using this year as a learning year on the state legislative side. Have had some fascinating hearings already. One of the states I didn't mention was Tennessee, and Oklahoma is the other one. Those two had AFP related bills that both are unfortunately dead. But again, just fascinating. If you have a chance to go back and watch some of the Tennessee hearings, it's just really interesting to see who's talking on the other side of this and what they're saying. So I'll leave it at that and happy to answer questions about the state stuff when we're done.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the, collecting the patient stories. I've always been impressed with ACSCAN's sort of storytelling, story collection effort, and was part of the project when I don't know how to pronounce her name now. Sitseiko was working on the Medicaid storytelling effort. So I always just think of her as the woman with the amazing shoes. But for those of you who know Sitseiko Staples, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so thank you so much. We'll transition to Ashira Vantries. Tell us a little bit about your organization and of course the work you're doing and the white paper.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this conversation this morning. My name is Ashira Vantries, and I'm counsel at Aimed Alliance. If you're not familiar with Aimed Alliance, we're a nonprofit health policy organization whose mission is to protect and enhance the rights of healthcare consumers and providers. Just like Kim's disclaimer, although I am an attorney, I am not your attorney, so please do not take anything I say as legal advice. Consult your own teams. But we really got involved in the AFP issue because we were doing a lot of work surrounding the copay accumulators and how copay accumulators evolved into maximizers and non-EHB programs, and how we really saw this kind of like evolution of employers who were using like the non-EHB programs transitioning to these alternative funding programs. So our work on this issue has really tried to focus on what laws are currently in place that would make this conduct inconsistent with federal law. And from our research, there's really a lot of areas that I think Kim mentioned that really raise a lot of questions for employers. And I think when we've been having conversations with employers, and that's what I think the white paper tries to do, is really try to make sure employers are aware of the risks of these programs. So the white paper that Michelle had mentioned was published by Angel Alliance and several other co-authors. And what it does is it provides an overview for employers on what alternative funding programs are and the type of assistance programs that they exploit. I think we always have to remember that employers, I think, are always coming from a good place off the start, and they're trying to save money and trying to provide benefits for their employees. And so if these programs are being pitched to them in a manner that, you know, they sound like a great cost saving solution, they may not be aware of the downsides of these programs. And so that's what the white paper really tries to do. So it goes over, you know, what are the programs that are being exploited, how they're for individuals who are uninsured and underinsured. They're not just like a free pit to get medication from. And the white paper also talks about, you know, what's the difference between a copay accumulator program, a maximized, or an alternative funding program. And it also talks about the various areas of law that are potentially implicated with alternative funding programs. So I think Kim mentioned a couple that fall under like ERISA and the fiduciary duty obligations, and how that obligation is really to ensure that you're providing benefits for the beneficiary and plan cost savings, although in some ways it can be considered, it's not the primary focus of that fiduciary duty. Another big area of law that we've done a lot of research in at Angel Alliance is the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and what federal law permits for international importation. Because like Kim said, often if like a patient assistance program isn't available, they'll pursue international importation. And there's really narrow circumstances when the FDA has said importing medications from overseas is permissible. And a lot of the AFP conduct doesn't fall within those exceptions. And then just the other areas that the white paper talks about is the HIPAA discrimination, because these programs primarily impact individuals with, you know, chronic conditions. And so they're creating a different set of benefits for individuals with chronic conditions compared to individuals with non-chronic conditions. And so really the white paper just tries to give a holistic view about what these programs are and how they're impacting employees, and provide some alternatives for employers who are hearing about these programs and how they're impacting their employees, and alternatives that they can pursue if they're still trying to manage their costs while providing benefits for their employees.
Thank you. And one of the pieces that we haven't really talked about that is so, it's very evident when you watch the Sharks marketing video, is that your employer, the individual who needs a given medicine, your employer knows that you are that patient, right? It's not, it does not protect your privacy in that sense from your boss or your organization knowing what your needs are. And that seems like such a core, I don't know, a core tenet of just a person's right to privacy. So wondered if you all thought, any of you had thoughts on that, or Ashira, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think, you know, each program is going to vary on the type of information that they're disclosing. But I think for any individual who is enrolled in an AFP, that's definitely a concern they have. You know, one, who is this third party that I'm being asked to give this really personal information about my income, my household, my condition? And two, if I'm struggling to work with this program, how do I talk to my employer about this program and how it's impacting my ability to get access to my medication if I have like a condition that's been like stigmatized, like HIV or AIDS? Those can be really difficult conversations and can impair someone's, you know, ability to fully advocate for themselves. So I definitely think that's another concern as well, especially because a lot of chronic patients, you know, they're pretty savvy. And so when they hear that there's a new third party, they're like, okay, who is this new person that's coming in and wants all my really personal data? So I definitely think it's a concern of individuals who have been enrolled in these programs.
I just wanted to pick up quickly on what Ashira said, because we did hear of a specific case of somebody with HIV, and in fact, this exactly happened. They wanted the information kept private, which was their right, and their employer was told of their condition. So it does indeed happen.
Mhm.
Terrible. Thanks so much for that. I think we have a couple questions coming in the chat, so I just want to make sure that we acknowledge those. Aaron McKeon has as a comment slash question from Crohn's and colitis. Isn't it possible that HHS will issue new copay rules that will make the work on state laws moot? Of course, it's always better to have a law than a rule. So wondered if anyone had thoughts on that. I think one of the, if anything, we've learned this year is that even if the courts go a certain direction, it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be enforcement when we think about the copay piece. But Kathy, I didn't know if you might want to sort of address that question a little bit.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, kind of acknowledging that state laws can only touch so many plans. We accept that. Those of us that do state work, it's like you just know every time you pass a law, you're only getting at so many folks. I think we're continuing to prioritize the state work on this issue because, you know, we've seen administrations come and go and change things. And just because the Biden administration does the right thing on this doesn't mean a future one will. And so we're just going to kind of continue to plug along on the state side, acknowledging that, you know, both things are really important, and we're supportive of the work that's going on, you know, both on the state and the federal side. But you know, things change, and
Sure.
you know, we want to make sure we have as many laws on the books as we can.
Yeah, and at the state level, I mean, that the plans, you have state insurance commissioners who may be a point of inflection or opportunity to educate. So those are all important stakeholders. So Roxanne from Epilepsy Foundation asks, is there a list of drugs that are most often targeted? And I know we have certainly in the oncology space, a number of them. Heard about HIV. I just wonder, bigger picture, are there other, I guess, rather than talking about a specific medicine, disease areas where this seems to be at risk? I would imagine those where, chronic patients are on, high cost or high, drug medicines, like in the biologic space, or, drugs that are just definitely necessary, but that the plan may decide they'd like to just kind of carve out.
It seems like, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
A few years back, it seems like hemophilia and cystic fibrosis, unfortunately, were kind of the canaries in the coal mine, where they were the two diseases that AFPs first targeted, appears to be, and I think they tried to get a lay of the land. Can they get away with this? And then it branched out to other conditions. And, it really can cut across any that rely on expensive specialty medications, but certainly some of the ones I read before, cancer, cystic fibrosis, arthritis, psoriasis, rare diseases, the HIV, hepatitis, cardiovascular disease is seeing more of this. So it can really touch upon any of those requiring those more expensive, but hemophilia and CF seem to have been, unfortunately, the groups that were targeted in the beginning.
Thanks. So Anna Hyde with arthritis asks a question: what happens if more or eventually all manufacturers prohibit copay assistance for AFP affiliated patients? How would the AFPs continue to function? I would surmise that they would morph and find a way to create another cottage industry, but that may be my cynical view. I wonder if any of the panelists have thoughts on that.
So I have a slide that I continually show that's the game of whack-a-mole. And I feel that they would just, exactly like you said, morph into another way to manipulate the system. And it just, the sad thing is just unfortunate for all patients that, eventually if manufacturers have to limit the practice, it harms, it harms patients.
Mhm.
And I think we're all here because we're trying to help patients, and we all have that clear same objective, and just anything that gets in the way of that is just really frustrating. So my feeling is they will continue to morph, and we'll continue to be dealing with these things.
Just
Yeah,
like
and
we
also,
went from accumulators to maximizers to planned fracturing, all kinds of things. Sorry, Ashara, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say exactly that. You know, I think with AFPs too, because some of them are already looking at international importation and the use of international pharmacies, if they can't use these patient assistance and copay assistance programs, that may be something they pivot to start leveraging more.
Amazing, amazing. And Roxanne, another question, are there federal bills on this? And certainly, I know there have been efforts to pull some together. Yesterday, during the ERISA 50th anniversary sort of hearing, I know that AFPs came up, but Kim, if you want to talk a little bit more, I think what the task force is doing is a thoughtful, really integrated approach, looking at executive branch engagement, multiple different factors there. So.
Yeah, we decided early on, of course, everything is on the table. We're not ruling anything out, to try to stop these practices. They're just too harmful. But we did put a plan together where we thought going to the agencies first, DOL particularly, but also FTC and others, because they are self-funded plans that are targeted here, and that's within DOL's, area of authority. So we've had several meetings with them. We've had several calls also with FTC. We will share that DOL definitely understands the issue. They have more than come up to speed in a very positive way, understanding how they work and also the patient harms connected. And our, next step really is to ask, what may be within their purview to take some action on this. The most recently was the White House Domestic Policy Council, which, we couldn't tell a lot, but we don't think they were necessarily as familiar, but we have really shared over the last year and a half, a lot of information with DOL. So that's why we think that they really are aware. And again, not leaving anything else, off the table. Could it be legislation needed or other things? It's certainly possible. We just thought that was the most practical way to go about trying to tackle the issue.
Yeah, thank you. I got a one-off message. I don't know, Kathy, if it might be possible for you to put a link in the chat, or maybe we can follow up after with the LLS ACS CAN one pager that you mentioned. That would be great. Are there any other questions from the audience? Or I know we're right at the end, but just want to make sure that nobody's left out.
Can I share
what
one quick thing? I'm so sorry, very
No, no.
quickly. Is
Go
that
ahead.
one thing I think that we all can have a role in doing is making sure that employees understand what type of health insurance they have. Because I think most employees don't know if they have a self-funded plan or a fully funded plan. And to get everybody to understand that, and to really, if they're comfortable, making sure that employers know that these employees are educated and they're not really going to stand for this, where they're paying all these premiums, and then when they truly need it, they don't have access to the medication. So I think that's an education area we all can do a better job of, because I think most people really don't understand what type of insurance they have and the implications for that.
Absolutely. And I think the tools that you all have developed really can help with that. So we will share the link that Kathy just popped here, as well as a link to the AIMD Alliance paper, which really is a step-by-step that kind of explains everything and what employers need to know. I will say that last year when we held the coffee chat about this, Leah Howard from National Psoriasis Foundation came forward as a CEO and said, look, I will commit that we will not allow AFPs in our employee health plan, and we'll do the due diligence to make sure they're not there. And I think so many of you since then have sort of come forward with that, again, a bold statement on behalf of your organizations, but many of you have many employees in your plan. And so I think your leadership, Kim, Charlotte, Ashira, Kathy, and that of the patient community is really what's going to take this forward. So I think continuing that education with with employers, continuing the due diligence and really capturing and reporting these situations. And I think sharing those stories with those of the panelists here today, because I think that you are the powerhouse that will really take this forward as patient advocates. So thank you all.